What's up guys, it's CG here, welcome back. Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day, Tactical Masters is released, and now it's time to take a look at the new decks that we got in this new set. And I have to say, for a deck building pack, this time the decks are kinda underwhelming. We did not get anything like Secret Slayers like Emancipator's Eldritch. No, these decks are mainly for fun, so if you're a fan of any of these archetypes, we're going to cover most of them to tell you exactly how exactly you should be playing them. And we did get a very niche archetype, so I think that's the one we're going to start with. So today we are going to profile Runick, aka Mr. Rune, like known it from the OCG for a very long time now, but Konami had to change it, of course. So this deck is basically for the people who want to still deck out their opponents, but they don't like waiting under Mystic Mine for 40 turns. So this is a deck out deck, and we haven't had a deck like this for a very, very long time. Like Empty Jar was the only deck out deck that ever did well before in the meta, like was so many years ago, and now Konami decided to give us an updated version of a deck like this, and the deck, it's not terrible, but it's a deck that has to play in a very certain kind of way in order to be able to achieve this win condition, because it doesn't have any alternative win conditions. You are never going to incorporate any other engine in this deck that is going to help you attack for game or anything like that. No, the main strategy of the deck is for you to wait, disrupt your opponent, and every time you do so, you take away cards from their deck, and then keep doing that until your opponent decks out. So the deck is very, very niche. It's a very Sky Striker-like deck if you want to compare it to anything. It's a deck that basically tries to keep tempo, advantage, and make sure that you overwhelm your opponent with resources. So before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So usually in Runic decks you're going to see a lot of builds that have like 40 spell cards, and this is very similar, but I am playing one monster in deck. So I'm playing 2 copies of Spellbook Magician of Prophecy. You can probably guess where this is going. This is mainly here for Spellbook of Knowledge draw power, because the deck, again, I mentioned that do need a lot of advantage in order to be able to do so and achieve your strategy. Otherwise you're not going to have enough cards to disrupt your opponent's plays, especially this format, because if you plan on playing this deck competitively, then you're going to have to face a lot of sprites, a lot of tier laments, a lot of decks that can do so many things. Like one interruption is never enough against these types of decks, so you need to have enough cards in your hand in order to be able to up with those decks, so you need to put as much draw power as possible in a deck like this, and since it does not have any other monster that you need to normal summon or anything, the Spellbook engine makes perfect sense. Now let's get to the sauce of the deck. We have the spell cards. The rest of the deck, the other 38 cards, are all spell cards. So let's start with the Runic spells. We have 3 copies of Runic Fountain. Now, this is the bread and butter of the deck. This field spell right here is the only reason the deck can win, because not only does it allow you to activate the Runic spell, the quick plays from your hand during your opponent's turn, but the thing you care about the most is that when you activate a quick play, you can shuffle up to 3 Runic quick plays from your graveyard to the bottom of the deck, and then you draw the same number of cards that you pack into the bottom of the deck. So this card gives you the advantage you need in order to be able to keep up. Usually you want to be having like 3 interruption cards every single time in your hand. When you use the last one, you're going to put all 3 of them back at the bottom of your deck, and then you're going to draw 3 cards again. So basically you use 3 interruptions, you got back the cards you put back into the deck, and the cards you're going to be drawing are most likely either searchers or draw cards that will help you get back into these types of disruption cards. So and when you shuffle your deck, those cards are going to be shuffled, so you're going to draw them again eventually. So yeah, this card, as long as you can keep it on the field, then you can basically win a lot of games when you have the tempo going. And if you're playing against this deck, then focus on getting rid of this card from the field. Without this card, the deck cannot do anything. It's going to crack after 1 or 2 turns because it's not going to be able to keep up the advantage with any other deck. We have 3 copies of Runic Freezing Curses. This card is the one that's basically like the imperm of the deck. You target an effect monster your opponent controls, you negate its effects, and then banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. So all the Runic quick plays have some things in common. First, they basically prevent you from using your next battle phase, which is something that is like the only reason you cannot combine this deck to anything that would be able to basically give you some offense, because it's not like even if you had some attack power, you would not be able to use it because of effects like this. And they also have an effect that can act as an instant fusion type of effect. You special summon a Runic monster from your extra deck to the extra monster zone. So you basically either choose the disruption effect or the search effect, depending on the card you're using, or you're choosing the effect to special summon from the extra deck, and the extra deck monsters basically help you search the continuous spell, they help you search the field spell, which is more important because again you cannot play without field spell. So yeah, these cards either disrupt your opponent and banish the top cards of the deck, giving you closer to your win condition, or giving you closer to your plays that will help go into that win condition by summoning the monsters from the extra deck. I have 3 copies of Runic Tip. This card basically adds a Runic card from your deck to your hand and then banishes the top card of your opponent's deck, and it also has the other effects as well. This is the searcher of the deck. You want to be using this during your own turn and during your opponent's turn because it gives you the cards you need. It's basically you can see this deck as basically like a Magical Musketeer type of deck. You can activate the disruptions during your opponent's turn from your hand because of the field spell, just like the Musketeers do with any of their monsters, and you basically need to be able to search those different types of disruptions in your hand to be able to keep up with your opponent's plays. We have 3 copies of Runic Dispelling. This is the card that basically when your opponent adds a card from the deck to their hand, except during the draw phase, you discard discard a random card from your opponent's hand, and then you banish the top 2 cards of their deck. It's a card that, while not exactly a disruption or a surge card, it can still motivate you to be able to keep up, because all of those cards that your opponent is going to be searching, they are not going to be using them every single turn, because it's not like all of these cards are going to be usable. So when you use this card and you hit a card that was usable, then that means that you're going to have to waste 1 less interruption and keep it for the next turn. So while this card, I would say it's probably the weakest of the quick plays, it's still a card that you need to max out, because these quick plays are not only meant to disrupt your opponent, but they are the reason you're winning, because they can banish your opponent's deck, and without it you're not going to win. And again, at worst case scenario, all of these cards act as instant fusion, so you can use them during your own turn to basically get a monster on the field and then get a search, or you can use them during your opponent's turn to summon another monster on the field that can help you get some type of protection, because the extra deck monsters can also provide that as well. We have 3 copies of Runick Flashing Fire. This is the one that targets a special summon monster your opponent controls. You destroy it and you banish the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. This is another really good disruption. This, with Flash Fire, its Freezing Curses, is basically the reason that you're going to be able to disrupt your opponent consistently. You need to have these cards in your hand at the beginning of every of your opponent's turns. Otherwise, you're not going to have enough disruptions to be able to make sure that you don't die to your opponent's onslaught and then basically get a turn back. And we have 3 copies of Runic Destruction. This is the last quick play that we play. It's the one that's basically backrow removal. You need to play a card like this in the deck at 3, just because when you're playing against decks like Eldritch, you're going to auto-lose because they have so many ways to destroy the field spell. So you need to have this card just to be able to at least have a fighting chance against backrow decks, because backrow decks are notorious for being able to not only outgrind decks like this, but also destroy their combo pieces, well, their spells and traps with cards like Conk and all the other cards. So yeah, Eldritch type of decks are the worst matchup for this deck, so you need to have a card like this to be able to have a chance against them. We play 2 copies of Runic Allure. This is the card that is not a card that you need in order to be able to win, but it definitely speeds up the process. It's a continuous card that says that each time a quick play spell activates, you banish the top card of your opponent's deck. Keep in mind, it says quick play and not Runic quick play, so we do play another quick play card in the deck we can use to basically not only disrupt our opponent, but when this card is on the field, basically get further into your win con by banishing more cards of your opponent's deck. So yeah, this card on its own, it doesn't do much, so it's why we play it only at 2, but it's searchable, so you play 2 because you do play Desires in the deck. So if you don't play Desires, you can run away with playing only 1 copy of this card, but because we do play Desires, we play 2. But yeah, it's a searchable card that if you can keep it on the field for a long time, it's going to get a lot of value, but even if you don't, it's not the end of the world, because you'd rather your opponent go after this card than your field spell. Now let's get into some other spells that we play in the deck aside from the Runic cards. We play 3 copies of Spellbook of Secrets. This is to go with the Spellbook Magician engine for the draw power, because you need to be able to keep up, so you need to be able to get as many cards in your hand as possible. So with these cards, along with the 2 copies of Spellbook of Knowledge right here, you're going to have some draw power that is going to give you the advantage you need. And again, because of Desires, you're forced to play a lot of copies of this card. If you don't play Desires, you can basically play like a 1-to-1 ratio instead of 2-3-2, but because we do play Desires, we have to have these in our deck in order to be able to search them, so we do play more copies than you would see normally. Now, I said that this deck is very similar to Sky Striker, and for a very good reason. You do play a lot of spell cards that can disrupt your opponent, but since you are playing a lot of spell cards and you are playing basically close to 0 monsters, so your monster zones are always going to be free, we do play some Sky Striker cards. So we have the 1 copy of Engage, because the hands that are going to open Engage, you usually want to use it only after you have 3 spells in the grave, because it's so easy to get 3 spells in the graveyard with this deck. You never want to use this 1 Engage without having 3 spells in the grave, because we don't play any of Drone's cards or the Array. We don't play any cards that can recycle this. The moment you use the first one, that's the only time you're going to be using it during the entire duel. So this is why you want to always wait until you have 3 spells in the grave to get the +1. And we do play 3 copies of Widow Anchor to search with the Engage. And Widow Anchor, even on its own, it's an amazing disruption, because not only are you negating your opponent's monsters, you're also stealing it, so they're not going to be able to exceed with it, they're not going to link with it. Against Sprite, this effect of interruption is really good, because they will not be able to activate their extenders from the hand unless they have a starter in their hand or something like that. And also, because this card is a quick play, it has synergy with Runic Allure, so when you're using Widow Anchor, you're negating an effect, you're stealing a monster, and you're banishing the top card of your opponent's deck if you have Allure on the field. So yeah, this card is really good. I wish we could just use the monsters a little better by attacking with them, but unfortunately we cannot do that because of this deck's specific interactions with all the quick plays. And again, if you want to play other monsters like link monsters, like the Charmers, to link away the monsters you're stealing, then maybe you can do that in the extra deck. But thing is, you're going to be using this card 99% of the time during your opponent's turn to disrupt them, not during your own turn, because you cannot push with the monsters you're stealing. So yeah, I don't feel like there is any reason for you to play any of those link monsters, because you want to keep these cards for only during your opponent's turn to be able to disrupt them and make sure you survive for the following turn. We're playing 1 copy of Terraforming because we need to see the field spell as consistently as possible, but the extra deck monsters search them a lot, so it's not like you need to play copies like Demise of the Land or Metaverse to make it that consistent, because it's already consistent enough. All those instant fusion cards we have in extra deck monster that searches the field spells, so it's not like you have to super commit to the field spell. Just playing the 1 copy of Terraforming is basically another free spell in the grave for a card like Engage and Widow Anchor as well. We play 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talent. This is a card that can help you not only keep up the advantage, but Forceful Sentry effect is going to come up a lot because being able to put one most important combo piece from your opponent's hand back into the deck means that you're going to have a much easier time disrupting them with the very linear disruptions that this deck has. We play 2 copies of Pot of Desires. If you're not playing this card, you can cut some numbers and maybe play some other staples. You can play like hand traps to make sure that going second is a bit smoother. But again, draw power, for me, it's so important in the deck because in order to win with this deck, with a specific win condition, you have to be ahead of your opponent for like 3 to 4 consecutive turns. If you're not ahead, then you're not going to be able to basically deck them out. So this is why you need all the cards in your hand you can possibly get. We play 1 copy of Upstart Goblin. Upstart is just an extra spell in grave. The life points you give to your opponent don't matter one bit because you're never going to make them their life point 0. You're always going to deck them out. So this card is basically a free draw. We play with 1 copy of Dimensional Fissure. This is a card that can slow down a lot of your opponents. It does kind of have anti-synergy with the Spellbook Engine, but if you can use the Spellbook Engine before you use this card, and then you use this card to basically make sure that your opponent's plays are going to be more awkward, so you're going to have an easier time disrupting them. A lot of decks cannot really play around this card. Like Tearlaments lose automatically when you have this card on the field. If they don't find a way to get their Galaxy Cyclone in the graveyard, then they're not going to be able to do anything. And 1 copy of Call by the Grave because it's a broken card. Now let's get to the extra deck. The extra deck is pretty much very standard. You just need to play 3 copies of the Runic monsters. So we play 3 copies of Munin, the Runic Wings. This is a card that when it's special summon for the extra deck, you discard a card to add a Runic continuous spell from your deck to your hands. So it's the one that searches Runic Allure, which is why you don't need to max it out. You can always search if you need it. And also it has a protection effect that when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a Runic card you control or a set card you control, you can banish this card you control, negate the activation, destroy the card, and then during the end phase, this card gives you 1000 life points, so you can also win in time with cards like this. We play 3 copies of Jerry the Runic Fangs. This is a card that cannot be destroyed by card effects. If it's special summon from the extra deck, you target a non-quick play Runic spell in your grave and add it to your hand, so it's basically recovery for your field spell, because the moment you run out of field spells, it's the moment you lose the game, but this card makes sure that it can keep you in the game for a bit longer. And also, when this card is destroyed by battle, you can target a card on the field and destroy it, so sometimes you can use this card. If you are not locked into anything, then you can basically run it over on your own to destroy a card, or it makes your opponent think twice before running over themselves, because they're going to lose a monster, the card in the process. And we play 3 copies of Hyujin the Runic Wings. This is the most important card because on summon from the extra deck, you discard a card to add a Runic field spell from your deck to your hand, so you're going to be adding your Fountain, and this is the card that you're going to be summoning 99% of the time turn 1 if you don't have Fountain in your hand already, because you need to see it ASAP, otherwise you're not going to be able to do much, because you're not going to be able to recycle those cards you use and draw 3 cards every single turn. And if another card you control will be destroyed by card effect, you can banish this card you control instead, and if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you return it to the extra deck, so you never run out of copies of this card. So as long as you have a Runic Fountain either in your deck or in your graveyard, the extra deck monsters will make sure that you're going to have it on the field. Now, if it gets Cosmic Cyclone 3 times, then yeah, that happens. Then you're not going to be able to do anything to win that duel, but thankfully, this type of scenario is not going to come up very often. And the rest of the extra deck are Super Poly targets, because Super Poly is a card you should be siding in this deck, because going second with this deck is basically a nightmare. You're not going to be able to do much to establish board, so yeah, playing Super Poly in your side deck for going second is going to make your going second games a lot more smoother. So we play 1 copy of Starving Venom, of course it's very generic, 1 copy of Dragostapelia because we have Tearlaments in the format, 1 copy of Garura, that's the new card that Konami made so that Super Poly would be main deckable in pretty much any type of deck, because as long as this card exists, then there's not a matchup that Super Poly is going to be completely unactivatable. Even against decks like Eldritch now, when they have Eldritch and a trap card, you can even use Super Poly against those types of decks now because of this card. Yeah, this card's amazing. We play 1 copy of Madragon, 1 copy of Earth Golem Ignister because Mathmech is in the format, so some people are going to be playing this, so you need to be prepared for that. And the last monster is basically, I would say, the most niche monster you play out of this, but it's a monster that I've seen that against a certain matchup is going to be completely devastating, and it's the 1 copy of Cordius, the Trifacic Delmon. This card, in order to be fusion summoned, it needs 1 Synchro monster, 1 Xyz monster, and 1 Link monster. So how do you summon this, you might be asking? Well, in the Punk Tearlament matchup, they usually, if they have an optimal hand, they're going to be summoning a Baron, they're going to be summoning an Appaloosa, they're going to be summoning a Dragostapelia, and they're going to be summoning either a Dweller or a Redoer. So already, you have the Synchro monster with the Baron, you have the Xyz monster with a Dweller or the Redoer, and you have the Link monster for the Appaloosa. So you Super Poly those 3 monsters, and then you get a 3k beater that is going to run over Dragostapelia, so you basically deal with 4 interruptions on the field with just 1 card. And if they don't activate, and they will not be able to activate Dweller during the draw phase, because you can use turn player priority to activate Super Poly during the draw phase, so it's not like you even get Dweller. I mean, against this deck it doesn't matter, but if you want to use this card in other types of decks as a Super Poly target, I'm just explaining how you should be using it. So yeah, this card against this certain type of matchup, it's really, really devastating. Its effect reads that you can basically pay life life points in multiples of 2,000, and depending on how many you paid, you can use these types of effects. When you pay 2,000, you add a spell or trap from your grave to your hand. With 4k, you destroy 3 cards your opponent controls, and with 6k, it makes it the only monster that can attack, but it also gains attack equal to half of the difference between your life points and your opponent, so it can basically become a one-shot machine that can pop cards and recycle cards as well. So this card is going to be adding your super poly that you used to summon it back into your hand so you can use it again later. It's going to blow up your opponent's board on top of everything you took away from the super poly, and it's going to attack for game with just itself. So yeah, this card, if you have some space in your extra deck and you're having trouble with a deck like Punk Tearlament, then try this card with super poly. It's going to win you a lot of games, and it's no exception with this deck. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Runick is like a very fun deck that you can try out. It's not anything competitive, so don't expect to have a lot of success with this deck, especially if you're playing it in a more competitive environment. But again, it's a really fun deck, so if you love the artwork, if you love the playstyle, give it a try. You're going to have a blast playing it, and you're going to make a lot of people mad in a lot of games. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.